While Disney villains, until recently at least, were some of the most iconic and beloved villains to ever grace the silver screen, their henchmen, while not nearly as talked about, have also managed to gather quite a following themselves. And unlike true Disney villains, who have come in a variety of different personalities, plans, and goals, their sidekicks are known to be usually from a very similar template. A comical, inept foil to the bad guy who's mostly there to add levity to tense scenes involving the villain. But the thing is, there's actually a lot more to Disney's villainous sidekicks than that. Because while it is true that most of the time they're used for comic relief, they're generally a lot more competent and factor into the plot than their collective reputation would imply. And today, I'd like to demonstrate just how many Disney villain sidekicks are more important than they appear at first glance. And there will be spoilers for pretty much every movie brought up here. So in case there's a movie you don't want ruined, you might just want to be on the lookout. Okay, so to start off simply, obviously not every Disney villain sidekick to ever exist fits the mold of the incompetent comic relief. Such Disney sidekicks as Diablo, Flotsam and Jetsam, and Helga are all famous for being completely serious, smart, and dangerous henchmen to the main villain. But at the same time, just because a sidekick is comical in their attempts to help the villain carry out their evil plans, doesn't mean they aren't good at it. Because as I just said, when you really look at it, most Disney villain sidekicks are actually a lot smarter than they're given credit for. For example, take Lucifer from Cinderella. While constantly foiled by the mice, he actually does his job of making Cinderella's life even more miserable pretty effectively, and quite a few times would have had the mice dead to rights if it hadn't been for Cinderella or some other unforeseen interference. He even almost manages to single-handedly keep Cinderella from getting to the Grand Duke in time to try on the slipper. To put it simply, while he's far from a serious cat, he's also far from a pushover. Or take Mr. Smee from Peter Pan. Once again, while he may be a bit inept, he still does everything that's required of him. He's Captain Hook's only true friend, successfully shoos away a crocodile that could easily eat him should he fall in the water without an ounce of fear, and perhaps most notably, finds Tinkerbell and helps Hook manipulate her into revealing Peter Pan's hideout with ease. Basically, while he can screw up the little things, the moment things get serious, he's really good at doing his job. At least until it's clear that Hook doesn't have a chance against Peter Pan anyway. And even on Skull Island, Hook nearly getting eaten by the crocodile is just as much his own fault as it is Smee's. Or for some more obscure examples, take Sir Hiss from Robin Hood. And to keep it short, he may be there for the laughs, but if Prince John had just listened to him, he would have easily won over the heroes. In fact, it was his hypnotizing King Richard that got Prince John on the throne in the first place. Or take Fidget in The Great Mouse Detective. Sure, he's definitely not the smartest guy ever, but he still does everything asked of him very easily. He kidnaps Olivia's father, gets everything on Ratigan's list, including Olivia, and even when he screws up, Ratigan ends up turning it all to his advantage. Heck, even after his plans go south, it's Fidget who engineers the perfect escape for Ratigan. So once again, while he's definitely there for comic relief, he is also more dangerous than he appears. And then we get to the Disney Renaissance, which is honestly chock full of competent Disney villain sidekicks. And one of the more unlikely examples would be LeFou from Beauty and the Beast. At first glance a klutz, idiot, and complete yes-man to Gaston, LeFou proves to be much more than that by the time the movie's over. Because while it's true that LeFou is pretty much Gaston's main cheerleader and punching bag, he's also his best friend. He supports him in everything he does and tries to help him in any way he can. And that's not even getting into everything he accomplishes over the course of the movie. Like when Gaston is sulking over Belle rejecting him, LeFou makes it his mission to cheer him up, and succeeds spectacularly by breaking out into one of the most famous Disney villain songs ever. And later on, when Belle and her father aren't home so they can be blackmailed, Gaston tells LeFou that he's going to stay there until they come back. And he does just that, quite smartly disguising himself as a snowman so they won't pay him any mind. Though, to be fair, we don't know if he did that on purpose or not. And later on, when Gaston is trying to prove Maurice is crazy, it's not actually him, but LeFou who eggs him on into talking about the Beast, and does a pretty good job of convincing the crowd that what he's saying proves he's nuts. And finally, after Gaston rallies the town to kill the Beast, LeFou is the one leading the mob when Gaston goes out on his own. Yes, that's right. LeFou becomes the leader of the whole thing, and even comes pretty darn close to killing Lumiere at that. And to his credit, he also knew when it was time to give up and run, something that Gaston, on the other hand, did not. Basically, for a character whose name literally translates to the Fool, LeFou proves to actually be pretty smart when the chips are down. Sure, he's far from graceful and conventionally competent, but he's still a much bigger threat than most people really give him credit for. In all honesty, had he picked his friends a bit more carefully, he could have done very well for himself, as he shows himself to be a pretty great and loyal friend to Gaston, even if he doesn't deserve him. Or for another example of that, take Iago. Now once again, this character may be funny, but he may also just be one of the smartest Disney villain sidekicks ever. He does everything that's required of him without any issue, including the crucial plot detail of stealing the lamp from Aladdin in under 5 minutes. And not to mention, it was his idea in the first place to have Jafar marry Jasmine himself to get the throne. Again, when you really look at it, this is one of the smartest, most reliable parrots you will ever come across, and the best sidekick Jafar could have ever asked for. And then, of course, there are the hyenas from The Lion King. Though Scar dismisses them as idiots that he can easily manipulate, they aren't nearly as stupid as they appear. Because while they aren't able to kill Simba either time they're tasked with it, that was mostly due to circumstances beyond their control, as they even point out after they failed the first time. And the second time, they weren't wrong to assume Simba would die anyway, as he nearly does before Timon and Pumbaa stumble upon him. But everything else they're tasked with doing, they pull off with flying colors. They perfectly pull off the stampede to kill Mufasa, as well as orchestrate it so that nobody would suspect they were behind it, ally themselves with Scar in the first place because they know he can help them, and finally make sure nobody opposes his rule after he becomes king. Heck, they even give Simba's side a pretty good fight, and it's pretty much only because Scar sells them out that he ends up losing. Seriously, if he hadn't done that, he may very well have won with their help. And there's also the fact that they're the only villain sidekicks in the entire official Disney canon to kill the villain themselves. proving once and for all that they aren't just there for laughs. These guys can get extremely dangerous when they want to, and it shows multiple times. Though most obviously in the case of Scar's death. Now I know that some might counter all of this by pointing out that there are still Disney villain sidekicks that fit the mold of the incompetent comic relief to a T, and that is certainly true. It's just not as many as you'd think. Like, Jasper and Horace might be a possible example of this, as they don't get much right throughout the movie and are even pretty much the reason that Cruella de Vil loses in the end. But at the same time, they were still able to kidnap the puppies in the first place, and it can be argued that they had no way of preparing themselves for some of the events that followed. But either way, they nonetheless come much closer to fitting the stereotype than most. And there's also Mr. Snoops from The Rescuers, who's probably about as incompetent as they come. He may do his job of preventing Penny from escaping, but that's about the only thing he does right. Now, Wiggums is an interesting case in Pocahontas, because while he doesn't do anything throughout the movie to help Governor Radcliffe, he's not tasked with doing anything to help him either. He's literally just there to be his jester and clown, and to have somebody for Radcliffe to express his true thoughts to. In other words, Wiggums is pretty much Radcliffe's sidekick in the most superficial sense of the word only, as he's only there for Radcliffe to have somebody to provide important information about his plans to. His only role in the movie is pretty much to provide a little more levity, as well as to justify Radcliffe's explaining his true motivations out loud. Because Wiggums is the only one Radcliffe trusts completely, as his job is basically to be his confidant, he can talk openly to him, which allows the audience to know what he's thinking. To put it simply, Wiggums can come across as incompetent because nothing is ever asked of him, and is simply there only to be funny and provide a middleman between the audience and Radcliffe. But the few times he does express a genuine opinion, it makes it look as if he might be smarter than his boss. But it's hard to know either way due to his limited role. And finally, there are the likes of Pain and Panic from Hercules, who might actually fit the typical sidekick molding the best. They fail at everything they do unless the boss is watching, pretty much just aggravate him and aren't much help all things considered, and provide plenty of comic relief. Heck, they even believe on a couple of occasions that if they ignore a problem, it might just go away, which only ends up making everything worse for them in the long run. As I said before, the only times they really succeed in doing anything is either when Hades is watching them closely, or when he has them do something so simple that anybody could do it. So really, if there was ever a Disney villain sidekick that fit the stereotype of being both comical and incompetent, it might just be Pain and Panic. Now, obviously, I could list more villainous sidekicks from both sides of this argument, that being ones that do and don't fit their typical image, but I think I've made my point by this point. At the end of the day, they are just like the villains themselves, and come in many different forms, and are often smarter than given credit for. Funny? Most definitely. But many of them are still a lot more competent than they appear. And honestly, it's a bit of a shame that Disney has moved away from them recently, as they were sometimes among the most notable and popular characters from their respective movies. Heck, I think the last Disney villain sidekick the company has made recently is Sour Bill from Wreck-It Ralph, who, just like most of the great villain sidekicks, is comical, pretty smart, and ends up playing a pretty important part in the plot. So when you really look at it, Though some are willing to just dismiss them as incompetent comic relief, Disney villain sidekicks are often a lot more important than many are willing to give them credit for. Okay, I think I've stated my case for long enough. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that Disney villain sidekicks are collectively smarter and more competent than their reputation implies? Or do you believe that I'm giving them too much credit in that department? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And like always, you don't have to agree with anything I said in this video if you don't want to. You are entitled to your own opinion on this just as much as I am or anybody else. And thank you all for watching. It is all greatly appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.